Hi, welcome to the Talking Gearheads. I'm your host, Frank Lee, with Euro World Motorsports, and today we'll be talking with professional race car driver and driving coach Alec Udell. Hello and welcome to the Talking Gearheads. I'm your host, Frank Lee, and today we have our first guest, professional race car driver Alec Udell.
Awesome. Happy to be on the show, Frank. Looking forward to talking about, whatever we get ourselves into here. We could talk about anything, I'm sure.
No doubt. Well, because we're trying to reach out to people at large and talk to them about motorsports, when I introduce you as a professional race car driver, I know I could speak an hour just on our history together.
Sure.
What would you tell people about your background that makes you a pro driver?
Yeah, my background, I started in go-karts, and I'm sure we'll dive in a bit more to this as we go on, but started in go-karts, started racing cars when I was about 13 years old. I've raced in professional racing series in the Pirelli World Challenge, SRO America, SRO Europe, the IMSA series. And so being a professional race car driver is not necessarily as glamorous as sometimes it is made out to be. A lot of it's kind of chasing deals, chasing partnerships, sponsorships, negotiating contracts with teams, with sponsors again, working through. I do a lot of coaching with drivers that are aspiring pros or aspiring just enthusiasts. And so there's a lot of business aspect that actually comes into entrepreneurship that comes into motorsports. And, the older that I've gotten and the more professional I've gotten in the sport, the more that it is about like the deal that you can put together to get in the seats, to have some fun in the seat. So it used to be, I'm going to do, like 100 laps in a week or 100 laps in a day in the go-kart. And now it's like, okay, I want to, I'm putting those deals together to get into the seat to do those 100 laps. So it's been an interesting change throughout my career.
Well, one thing that I've noticed is that when I talk about that, people at large, outside the motorsport community, they still see race car driving or professional race car driver as a job that you're into it, you race, you win races, you win championships, and as long as you do that, you'll have a job for as long as you want to race a car. And what do you say when people think that?
Yeah, I think it's that's kind of not necessarily the bare minimum, but in a perfect world, that's what happens. And there's several drivers that have made that happen. But more and more as time goes on, the sport gets more expensive, the cars get more complex. The technology that's being used is just a lot more expensive to upkeep. That happens less and less because it takes more people, more of an effort to put the cars on track and go racing. And we've seen that with like Formula One introducing, cost caps in the sport, right? And so there's been kind of endeavors put up by the racing series to keep the cost kind of controlled. And that, is a focus of, okay, let's get more drivers on track.
Well, even the original GT3 concept was designed to keep costs low.
Sure.
Yet, how do you say you're keeping the costs low when to go racing, you have to purchase a GT3 car, and that GT3 car's base price is $550,000.
Yeah.
Before you've transported, prepped, and actually driven the thing.
Oh, yeah.
But in that, for example, when I tell people about you and that you went to Europe in BMW, the platform you've never driven in,
mm-hmm.
on tracks you've never been on, win the GT4 championship, and we couldn't get you a sponsorship coming back to America. People look at me like I'm crazy. How does that happen?
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of it for me as I'm learning more about the sport is really about how you present the opportunity, right? And approaching it in the right way. And so the typical, sponsorship in terms of you hear this phrase if you've been in sponsorship in motorsports at all, and if you haven't, you're hearing an outdated phrase, but it's win on Sunday, sell on Monday, right? And
that's the plan.
And that's the sort of thing that used to be the case, especially like in the NASCAR days, where it was you're racing this stock car that's a car that you could theoretically buy on the showroom floor because it has such a connection between, I see that car, I see it doing well, I see it being faster, like the Ford being faster than the Chevy in the 1950s and 60s, then I'm going to go buy that car.
And there was a time that was an accurate statement.
Yeah, exactly.
And the funny part is it's not accurate within NASCAR by any stretch,
Sure.
but in sports cars, it's a lot closer to a showroom car.
Yeah, totally. It totally is. But in terms of the phrase of win on Sunday, sell on Monday, that concept is kind of, I don't know, in a way gone out the window as the, the advent of like social media and, new media, call it, just ways that you can connect. It's just changed, it's not just motorsports, but it's changed sports in general. There's a lot more focus on the individual driver or the individual, team, the individual person, rather than the sport as a whole. And so it's really about putting those pieces together, and it's very interesting. And for me, I am learning to be more creative and learning that there are opportunities where you can go out and create that interest, like what we're doing now, and create the insight into it. Because at the end of the day, I think that individual and that personal connection that you can make with someone is much more valuable than just some sort of dollar sign or a a report as to how many people watched a car driver on a track. And so people want to be invested in the story, invested in the process, and that I think has changed as time. I think we see especially with more and more documentary style things, more and more behind the scenes things. I'm enjoying that aspect of the sport.
Well, and you have a great story on your own, and let's talk about that.
And we've been, we've had a
we
good
have
partnership.
A story.
Yeah, exactly. Good partnership through that story. Yeah.
And technically I'm only a chapter in the Alec Udell story.
Well, it's been a long chapter, or you've been part of multiple chapters of the story as well, and that's been an awesome. I'm glad to have that support.
And I'm very proud to be a part of it. So bear with me while I ask you to repeat another chapter of your story that I've watched you repeat 700 times.
Sure.
And I can't imagine how many times you have repeated it.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about how you started.
Okay. Yeah. So I always love talking about how I started, and I started in karts. A lot of, drivers started in go-karts, right?
And how old were you?
Yeah. I started when I was 5 years old. Yeah.
And that impetus came from who?
My grandfather.
And he bought the cart.
Yes, he bought the cart.
And he said, let's go racing, or he said, drive this and see what you think?
Well, basically, there was a neighbor of ours that had a go-kart, and he was friends of. We were friends because we were the only kids that were living on the block.
Okay.
And so I kind of knew him. My parents knew, and so we went and drove his cart that he already had in the parking lot of, I think it was the Montgomery High School.
Okay.
Up about 30 minutes from here now. And drove that. It was awesome. I wanted to keep driving it. And so for my birthday, my grandfather bought a cart. I assume he cleared it with my mom, which, she's been a huge supporter of my career. So.
And you and I both know that nothing gets by your mother that she does not approve.
Yeah, exactly.
If Mama Udell don't like it, it's not happening.
It's not happening. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so it just it turned into a passion thing. And obviously, you don't really get into the sport at such a young age. You don't get into any sport really at such a young age, but let alone motorsport, unless you have some sort of family passion for it.
Of course.
And so that's one thing that's been very true across my years.
And so that means your father has a passion for it and a background. Your grandfather, a passion and a background.
Yeah.
And I'm more impressed with your grandfather's background.
Yeah.
Because this is a man who has been dedicated to different disciplines of motorsport over decades.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So he started with a go-kart of his own when he was a kid. One of the ones that you buy out of I think it was the Sears catalog.
Sears catalog, yeah.
With a chainsaw engine. Then his brother raced dirt track, and so he drove his brother's dirt car bits, and then he got into drag racing, and then back into some dirt track, and then into circuit racing. So he's kind of been in it all, and ultimately ran the Midwest division with SCCA and was one of the marshals in the series, and
he's a driving instructor himself, isn't he?
Yeah, he's been a driving instructor, but now I instruct him, and that's a later chapter, I suppose.
Well, when your grandson becomes a European champion,
sure,
that makes you qualified if nobody else is, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's been interesting though, because
so your grandfather, after he bought you this go-kart, saw you enjoying it.
Yeah.
He knew what the process was to get you involved. In other words, you weren't a kid saying, Mommy and Daddy, take me racing on this go-kart. No, your grandfather had a program in place if you chose to do it.
not necessarily a program, but they at least knew, okay, if we want to get them started at a young age, this is where we go.
Right.
And
That's
then,
what I mean.
and then we kind of, from there built up and grew. So I raced go-karts for 10 years or around 10 years, 9 years before I jumped into a car for the first time, but 10 years like sequentially. And then I went full-time racing cars. And so that's kind of the process there, won some national karting titles, did that stuff, and then jumped into a Spec Miata, which is, that's kind of the same. My grandfather was racing a Miata at the time as well, when he was still in his 60s. And so that was kind of the first jump in. When you come out of like a car and go into, or kart and go into a car, it's a big jump,
Well, yeah, you have options on tuning that you didn't have in the go-kart.
Sure. Yeah, you have options on tuning, but you also have suspension. And so when I talk with drivers or with people that are looking to drive and explain kind of why you start in a go-kart and why there's a lot of skilled drivers that come out of go-karts, is because everything's so instant.
Yes.
Like in a sports car, you've got the shocks, which are a lot softer. The suspension's a lot softer.
Things happen a lot slower in a car.
There's a lot more movement,
Yeah.
and so you don't get that really direct feel like you do from the tire that you get in a go-kart.
Well, I mean, even I got to meet Bobby Eberly at that time out in Katy, and he was telling me here he was having won his second consecutive Indy Lights title, and he was telling me how he still trains in a go-kart.
Oh yeah,
because he loses his edge driving IndyCar all season and gets back into a go-kart to sharpen up. And an IndyCar, even an Indy Light car, that's a seriously sharp handling car.
very, yeah.
And he says he loses something when he's out of the kart for a season.
Yeah, and what that loss is the feeling of where the edge of grip is, where that limit of traction is, because that's ultimately what driving fast is all about. Knowing where, okay, the tire is almost sliding, or it's about to slide, or it is sliding. And so there's I mean, you've seen it in your instruction, right, where guys are going through a corner at 20 mile an hour less, but they lose the car because they can't feel that it's about to slide and they're in the wrong position on track, and inputs are all incorrect and all that stuff. And so that limit of grip is like the most important thing when it comes to driving fast. So that's what you get out of a go-kart.
Because there's no suspension.
Yeah,
It's just chassis
Well,
flex.
the chassis flex, yeah, exactly. And it's instant. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like you said, you went and, so when you quote unquote, and this is another thing that I think is so understated about racing, are the years spent developing your skill.
Sure.
The time and the effort that goes into that. Because by the time the public is, or the racing public's introduced to Alec Udell in the pro class at 16, 17 years old,
Yeah.
they weren't there for how many years of go-kart racing?
Yeah, 10, 11, 12,
How many weekends traveling?
yeah, lots.
How many, I mean, I don't think people appreciate how deep and large the sport of go-kart racing is.
Sure. And this is something where I speak with, guys that I coach as well when we're out at the track is, I mean, inevitably in motorsports, you're going to have, spins, you're going to have crashes, you're going to have wrecks. It's more so a matter of when, not if, just because that's what happens. You're pushing the limits of the car. You're pushing your limits in the car.
And how many people just like you doing the same thing?
Yeah, exactly.
In the same turn?
Yeah.
Trying to do it at the same time.
Trying to do it at the same time. Yeah. Yeah. So, a number of uncontrolled elements added into you trying to push and find where that limit is in that. And so it can be very disheartening when you're having these experiences and you're getting into a car for, say, that you this is your first time driving on track, right? But in karting, I had all those same experiences in go-karts, spinning, going off, the wrecks, whatever. But it just was at a much. Our host here forgot to mute his phone.
I could have sworn that was muted. Oh, sorry.
No, that's all good. It's just at a much slower, lower pace, right? And when people aren't necessarily paying attention, it doesn't matter if you huck a go-kart into a wall. You just buy another one, or you fix the one that you have.
Well, that's no different than top-level racing. You huck one into the wall, you buy another one, right?
Well, exactly. It's just the prices are about 10 to 100 times more expensive.
3 more zeros on that check.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's part of the process, though, right?
And how much filtration did you witness from go-karting into car racing? Like, Go-kart racing,
Mm.
how quickly did you see people you start with get filtered out of the sport because of the time, effort, and money involved in that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple levels to that. There's obviously, going from like the local levels where there's some kids that were really quick, but then didn't have the commitment to go racing nationally, right? And so you see the kids that were quick, when I started out, or when I was 5 years old, uh, from 5 to 10, there were kids that were quick regionally, but then never made the jump to go nationally. And so I'd say there were probably like three to five of us from like the Texas region that were racing nationally and really competitive and good, that were in my age group. And then you go nationally and there's like 30 to 40 to 50 drivers depending on what race you're at. And so then there's all these drivers, right? So then you start meeting kids from all over the country or sometimes all over the world depending on when you're going. Now you've got 40 to 50 drivers, and I'd say out of the 40 to 50 drivers that I knew, I probably knew about 20 of them fairly well because I'd see them consistently. There's like between 5 and 7 probably from my age group that are out there competing, at a high level still. And so it goes, it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. But the interesting thing with this sport is, it's not everywhere, not like there's not like a football team there's no racing team at every single high school, right? So
not.
The ability to get on track is a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, different towns have different levels of support for motorsport.
Sure.
You hear about the small towns in the middle of nowhere that you don't hear about racing, but by God, they've got a dirt track, and every Friday night,
Yeah.
it's game on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and they don't even have a football team.
Yeah. True. Very true. Very true. That's
so
interesting.
now, and in that, and I've watched a couple of racers transition into the dirt side, and from go-karting, I noticed that you did not.
Sure.
So what caused you to focus on the road course side and not get into the dirt track or dirt tracking, dirt circuit type of racing from there?
Yeah, I think the general path or the trend for like if you're going oval racing or dirt track racing, because like there's a lot of oval kart racing as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and on dirt. So for me, it was kind of just following the path that was laid out for me, and the typical jump from like a go-kart, which you mentioned earlier, Bobby, right? Like he goes from go-kart into open wheel.
Yeah.
I'd say that's the most like typical path that most guys want to go down, guys or gals want to go down when they're jumping from like the kart into a car, right? They want to jump into an open wheel because it's the most similar handling vehicle. For me, I mean at the time, you look at late 2000s to early 2010s, the safety in open wheel cars, which has improved dramatically, but like was not there, right? You had like Dan Weldon pass away, you had Justin Wilson, so there was this time when sports, or not sports car racing, when open wheel racing was just very dangerous. And so going from one into the other, remember you said my parents, right, my mom, right, were a bit worried, and so having their support obviously was important because it was helping me get to the opportunities that I had, because there was obviously some family investment when I was going into the car racing.
So, and then this is to explain what people understand. They want to see it and they don't think about the money.
Yeah.
And how important the money is. In other words, the car doesn't just fall out of the sky for you.
Sure.
Somebody has to buy that car.
Yeah.
And even at the go-kart level, when you're riding at that top level for go-karts, what was the price of a go-kart back then?
Yeah, and the prices are still the same, but you get
in other words, I don't think people appreciate the cost of a cart.
Yeah, sure. A go-kart, like ready to rock, ready to go, that's, a tag, the 100cc standard one that we were racing, they're between like $7,000 to $9,000, depending on the manufacturer. Some of them are less expensive, some are more expensive. But what you don't see is you're competing against, it's spec racing. And that's, we talked a little bit about it, but for me, spec racing is one of the best ways to develop your skill as a driver. And that's why a lot of karting is very good for development of skill, because there's all these guys, engines are all the same, chassis are relatively the same, and you have to go out and just be the best,
which leads to racecraft, the development of racecraft,
sure,
on top of your driving skill.
Yeah, but when you have like such a small opportunity for passes, little advantages in weight, or not weight because there's a standardized weight, but in power, in handling, in grip, right? Those little changes make the world of a difference. Because I mean, you've seen it on the pro level, right? The difference in times between like the first and the 10th car.
Is 9/10 of a second, and at least it was in 2017.
Yeah. So in karting, you'd go and the whole field would be covered by a second, 30 cars, and the top 10's covered by a 10th. And so
Tight.
Yeah, at the national level, you've got teams or families or whatever that are buying 10, 20, 30 engines, dynoing all of them to find which have the most, extra half horsepower.
All right, now that's a car budget there.
Yeah. Oh, it is for sure. And that was the problem. So that's why I went car racing, is because
if you're going to spend $100,000, you may as well be in a car. Yeah.
more than that.
In a go-kart. So they were spending more than $100,000 to race those go-karts.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's for sure at the time.
And again, that's not a series that's giving you engines. That's not some magical sponsor out of the sky.
No.
This is mom and dad writing $100,000 checks or more.
Or more.
So their kid can win a national title in a go-kart.
Yeah. Yeah.
In case you're wondering.
and a lot
but that's top level, right?
That's top. That's those are the guys, because there were some, right, that go compete in or now are in like Formula One that I've raced against, or in IndyCar, those types of names, right? And so it is a sport that's very challenging to, one, get the opportunity, and then two, continue to get the opportunity because of that barrier to entry.
So how old were you when you won your first go-kart national title?
So I won a points championship in 2008. So I was 13 years old, 12 years old.
And you were in a car at the age of 15.
Yeah.
So by the time you had your second national title, were you expecting a sponsor to come along and pick you up because you had won this? Or was there an expectation for a potential car sponsor?
Yeah, for me, it's as a 12 or 13-year-old, of course,
you're
right?
thinking, okay, I've done this.
Yeah,
somebody's got to pick me up because I'm this good.
Right. And part of what's changed, kind of going back to the sport, right, is it's become the individual focused, and that's especially with social media. And so that's something that I think I didn't take as much advantage of as I could have at the time. But is very, very much an opportunity and an avenue for someone now to be able to take that. But we'll get into that, I'm sure, at a different point. For me, it was like, and this is, also for my family, like, hey, we just got to go win the races, show up, do well. They didn't necessarily understand exactly the path there either.
No, I mean, how many family members have been professional race car drivers?
Yeah, exactly.
So even with the accomplishments of, say, your grandfather.
Yeah.
That was all done as a hobby, basically, because he was a working man with a family of his own.
Yep.
His focus was working, developing his career to support his family.
Sure.
So racing was, hey, this weekend on this month, I can go do this thing.
Yeah.
But nobody was paying him money to go race for a team.
Yep.
He had no career path in racing. It was just a hobby and passion of his own.
Yeah.
So where would the expertise come?
That's the challenge, right? Yeah. And so at that time, it's difficult, and that's why you almost need someone, or you need the opportunity to have like a coach or someone that you can work with that knows the industry. And I was very fortunate that we got hooked up with a coach, and that was really when my career started to improve in terms of like my driving skill and being, just like if you're.
So who was that first coach for you?
Yeah, well, the first coach I had a couple of coaches, but the one that made a huge difference and really started working with me one-on-one was Stuart Robinson.
I know Stuart.
Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
In fact, he's the one who introduced me to you.
Yes. Yeah.
So Stuart was the coach that really helped you figure a few things out.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
And Stuart himself, I understand, has other titles of his own on a go-kart.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very, very talented driver. Very quick, and so that was one of the things that okay, so now we've got the coach, we've got some opportunities, just need to keep pushing forward. Mm-hmm. It's not as direct, as it used to be.
Exactly.
Yeah, and part of that is the type of advertising dollars that are in the sport, because it's different than it used to be, without the tobacco companies, without the
Tobacco
alcohol.
and alcohol,
Yeah,
those were the
exactly.
big things. And when those were eliminated, the sport changed dramatically,
Yep.
very quickly,
Yeah.
because the dollars spent back in the 70s and 80s were much more than they spend now. And if you compensate for inflation,
Yeah.
the numbers are even larger.
Oh yeah.
So, they spent $1 million on a car back in the 70s and 80s for tobacco and alcohol sponsorship and didn't sweat it.
Yeah.
And now, a top car being $500,000, everybody's wondering how we're going to pay for it
Yeah.
30 years later.
Sure. And part of that too is the driver salaries then were about equal to what driver salaries are now.
The same, like the factory guys get $380,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were pulling that in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. Close to $500,000. And racing fewer races and getting appearance fees at events and all kinds of things. And so that's where I think the understanding came from, like my family, right? My grandfather, my father, just having seen that happen. And there was still a good degree of that, up until for my career started to really move up right around like 2008 as well, which obviously, there's a time.
Huge change in 2008.
Right, exactly.
The world changed in 2008.
Yeah, the world changed in 2000. And so there's lots of, motorsports is a discretionary spending sport.
It's the first thing to suffer when things go bad.
Sure. Yeah. And so it's, kind of hitting the things in the right spot. And now I don't use that as an excuse, but I just look back, as a 12-year-old, I had no idea what's going on.
What 12-year-old does.
Yeah. Yeah. But now knowing what I know, I can understand, kind of what the changes were in the sport.
We can all look back on our youth with our modern lenses.
Yeah.
And with a great understanding of, so that was what was happening back then.
Sure.
But, you can't fault for someone for what they knew or didn't know as a teenager or a child.
Yeah. And so all of that to say that, I still had some great opportunities, and that's what got me into, driving in the Parallel World Challenge Series and whatever it is, each opportunity, whether, it's good or bad per se, it leads to the next one.
Now, let's talk about that for a second.
Sure.
That transition from the go-kart to the car.
Yep.
All right. Was it I guess it was the Spec Miata series?
Mm-hmm.
And how long did you do that before you got in the Parallel World Challenge car? Was that one season or a half season or what?
It was like a season and a half, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. So I started kind of driving in a local at MSR Houston, which is the track down south of Houston. That's our club track, and we were members there. Helped kind of build the kart track there, because at the time there was one kart track in Houston that was a bit outdated, and so looking to grow the kart scene. Now there's 4 tracks in Houston, which is awesome. So it's nice to have been a part of that development process of the sport in the Houston area. But back to the question, there was a like a club series basically. So I started racing in that when I was about 13, because that's the age that you had to be to get an SCCA license or a NASA license. And then I raced that for a year while also racing the karts, and then jumped into the Camaro the following year. So about a year and a half or so.
Price difference between the Spec Miata you purchased and drove in versus the Camaro you got in that first season in World Challenge?
Well, the Spec Miata we already owned it because my dad drove it.
Okay.
But
basically a leftover race car was
a leftover race car that we kept putting money in, but I think it was like call it a $20,000 race car,
right?
A $15,000 to $20,000 race car.
Yeah,
and it was a really good one because we kept putting a better engine in it, and similar to what we talked about with spec racing, it's a spec class, and so a horsepower in Spec Miata is a big deal.
Yes.
So it was always looking for the best opportunity. We had a really great engine builder that we ended up opening a shop with, Ed Gilfus, still a great friend, and so. That was a great car, but then into the Camaro, that's like $150,000 car, so like 10 times more expensive.
More than.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. 15 to 20,000.
Yeah. Gosh. So let's talk about that car.
Sure.
Was GM building a Camaro race car that you could purchase and race, or did you have to build it?
No, that one was built by Riley.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay, Riley
Yeah,
Motorsports.
exactly. So that was a Riley built Camaro, and that was kind of the first, or not the first, but they were, commissioned basically by GM to build the Camaro.
So how did you go about even knowing who or what to talk to buy a car to go there?
Yeah, we didn't buy the car the first time. So at a race event in Las Vegas called the Super Nationals. It's a
Yes.
karting event, one of the largest ones in the world.
It's world famous.
Yep.
Super Nats.
Yeah, Super Nats, the Super Nationals. That year actually was a year that Schumacher was competing there, which was cool. So got to see him driving. I think he finished like 7th or so. Though obviously it's a competitive field.
Intensely, yeah.
One of the drivers that I knew from Texas had started a race team in Dallas. And so I went, his name's Jordan Musser, raced with his team for that year. So we kind of met. I had been driving, he knew me from karting, from being in the Texas, regional series, knew that I competed well, and we kind of talked and ended up going down that route.
Okay, so I'm gonna unpack that little item.
Sure.
So you meet this team owner, Jordan.
Yep.
And how does that discussion even begin about him looking for a driver for a car, or you wanting to drive his car?
Yeah, and that was, being 15 at the time, it was like, yeah, I want to do this. And then also working with, talking with my dad and my coach in terms of like, okay, how does this happen?
Yeah.
How fundamentally, how financially, all those types of things.
And
so,
since you didn't buy the car,
right.
So I'm thinking that Jordan's team had the car and the equipment.
They had already started the team. They had run a couple of IMSA races that year. So our plan was to jump into IMSA, but they wouldn't license me because I wasn't old enough. So then we went to Pirelli World Challenge because I could get licensed at 15 in World Challenge.
So did you just buy the time in the car?
Yeah, basically it was like, essentially it's renting a seat in the car, and that's pretty typical in motorsports, especially in sports car racing these days, where the team owns the car, they have all the equipment, they've got everything, and you just they operate it for you. You arrive and drive is kind of the term.
Thank you for leading me into that.
Sure.
That's a perfect segue.
Yeah.
So in that arrive and drive, again, I think customers are, forgive me for saying customers, I think people who don't know racing, they may have heard of arrive and drive, and that sounds really cool on paper because it's a very simplified term.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they don't appreciate the number of expenses you're expected to cover in an arrive and drive scenario.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
So when they say to you, and I don't know the specifics, so let's just unpack the arrive and drive scenario with the Camaro back in the day.
Yeah, so basically, and I can't remember the specifics in terms
but
of
knowing
like
that
numbers.
It's a $150,000 car.
Yeah, and basically what you've got is you've got a running cost of the depreciation plus like the rebuild on the transmission, the engine, or replacing the transmission, the engine, depending on the car, the consumables in terms of like oils, and then fuel, tires. So those are all the things which you spoke about earlier.
Tires, pads, and fluids.
Yep, that goes into running the car. And so that is basically, it's like, okay, depends on the contract. Here is what we have for the year. Here's what we budgeted, X amount of tires per event. The fuel, is X amount per event, and this is all included. Anything beyond that, you're having to pay for. Is usually how it goes.
Right. And is there an insurance policy you can purchase to cover that in case things go seriously wrong?
Yes. Yep, you can. And some teams will require you to have an insurance policy. And the insurance policies are only good in case of a write-off. So in case the car is like damaged beyond,
Repair,
half of the value essentially. And so, if you wreck the car and it's like a $10,000 expense, that's going to be coming out of pocket. If you wreck the car and it's completely totaled, okay, then it's like I think it's the deductible can be anywhere from like $15,000 to $20,000, but it covers the $250,000 or the $150,000 car, whatever it is.
And your time out in the Camaro, at what point did you have that big off? Was that your first day? Was that a month into it? Was that a year later?
It was a few races in. I had a big one.
Was it your first car crash or you?
Yeah, the first big one. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, because it's frightening to me. I've seen it on YouTube a few times, and to me, knowing you,
yeah,
after even this many years later, to me, it's both frightening and hilarious at the same time. I
I don't know if I'd say it's hilarious. Um,
And when I say hilarious, it's because your voice is on the video.
oh yeah,
And at 15 years old, it's a very different octave than it is now.
sure it is. Uh, yeah,
How scared were you when you knew you were going to lose it?
oh, not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, at no point in it was I scared. And it just, if you've ever been in an accident on the road, right, it happens so quickly that you don't really have time to process anything. And so for me, it's, more about being frustrated that I made a mistake. And so this is part of the thing, looking back on it and being able to, really see, okay, was that the best place necessarily for me to be in, at the time? And so that's the part where it's the experience comes into play, right? And not having the exact, and it was a very confusing system at the time in terms of like, okay, you do this and then you'll get here, and then that may help you get over to this series, but then if you do well here, that might get you an opportunity there.
Nothing clear cut, just a whole bunch of maybes.
Exactly. And so it was our best introduction into pro racing at the time, or that we could find, I suppose, but it may have not been the right place to be at the time.
Right. Well, I mean, and again, like you said, it's a whole bunch of maybes.
Sure.
There's nothing set.
Yeah.
And we can all look back on mistakes.
Yeah.
But you make the decisions you make based on the information you're given or that you can even get.
Sure.
And you just go from there.
Yeah.
But I hate to hold on to this just a little bit longer. So how bad was the damage to the car in that incident with the Camaro?
So it needed a tub.
Okay. So did that require a call to the insurance company?
That one, no, it did not actually. Okay. That one, we got a new body for the car and basically rebuilt it. So rebuilt it. We're back at the next race. It was the first race of the weekend. There were 2 races, and we were looking for a car to get in for the next day. And it just, obviously there's no cars. It was up in Canada as well, so kind of far away from any opportunities. But yeah, that was, not one of my greatest experiences, but a great learning experience.
Well, that's the whole point of it, is like you're when you're getting started.
Sure. Yeah.
And like you said, you learned so much from it.
Oh yeah.
And that was when you were 15, and you're 26 now.
26. Yeah.
So that's 11 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, in your mind, does that seem like forever? Because that's almost half your life.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem like a while ago.
But to me, that was yesterday.
Yeah.
11
Yeah.
years ago, I remember like the back of my,
Yeah.
it's 2012.
Yeah.
And I can tell you everything I was doing in 2012 like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
But to you, it was a lifetime ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically.
Because you've come a long way since then.
Sure.
The lessons learned, the experiences, the championships, the challenges.
Yeah.
You kind of look back out on that thinking, oh, that wasn't a big deal.
Sure.
But at the time, when it happened, it seemed like,
Well,
I'm sure, a very big deal.
It does, and that's part of the challenge. I think for young drivers especially, is you look at every single opportunity and you put too much weight on it, where it's like, okay, if I screw up, I'm out. I'm never going to have another opportunity, and that's not the case at all. It's about the perseverance, the relentlessness, the hunger, the desire to keep moving forward, in spite of any sort of issues that you're going to have.
And just the time that I've known you, you and I have both witnessed people together who have, you thought, wrecked every opportunity to ever get in a car again, totaling other cars, for factory teams, for privateers. And, 6 months later, they've got a ride and they're driving somewhere. And you're like, the guy destroyed a $500,000 car. How is he in a car again?
Yeah. And it's, in a way, par for the course. And I think the mindset aspect of this sport is extremely underplayed. A lot of people just focus, and in anything really, the mindset aspect of high performance is extremely important. That's a whole nother topic.
True.
A whole nother topic, but especially for young drivers, because in a way you're more, I don't want to say fragile, but you're more susceptible to doubt.
Of course.
And especially at that time for me, it was like, okay, am I supposed to be in this car? Am I supposed to be, racing in a car right now? Am I too young for this? Do I not have the skill? All that
Well,
type of stuff.
and that's an interesting point you bring up.
Sure.
Uh, as an instructor of a number of different subjects at this stage of my life, I'm old enough now to have literally a historical perspective on things. In other words, because 11 years ago was yesterday for me,
Yeah.
because 20 years wasn't very long for me, 30 years, I mean, and I'm sitting here in my 50s going, I can't believe 30 years went so quick.
Yeah.
Blink of an eye.
Mm.
And I remember, even as a young athlete, these minor things which seemed like the end of the world,
Yeah.
but in the perspective of the rest of my life, that whole time of my life was inconsequential relatively,
Sure.
much less that little mistake, a tempest in a teapot, if you will.
Yeah.
So yeah, young driver, first time in a car in the lowest rung of the sports car series.
Yeah.
He tubs it, a few months into it.
Yeah.
Oh no, end of the world.
Yeah.
No, relax. They make other cars.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
In fact, they're making new ones every day.
Every day. Well, most of the time. Yeah.
And now it's just over a decade later with licenses, championships, and
Sure.
all sorts of exciting things under your belt.
Yep.
And that was a lifetime ago.
Feels like it. That's for sure.
And you're only 26.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're,
I feel like I'm getting older, but
well, with the perspective of the sport, even
Yeah.
motorsports in general, you've now been doing it 20 years.
oh yeah.
You're 1/5 away from a century.
Yeah. That's true.
So most people are done with their careers in 20 years and moved on to their retirements.
Yeah.
And you've done that by the age of 26. Plus you've gotten your college degree,
Yeah.
plus your work experience. And let's talk a little bit about that. I know that I introduced you as a professional race car driver.
Sure.
But you're a busy guy.
I like to think productive.
Highly productive. Yes,
Yeah.
that's good. Highly productive. But you are a business manager at Houston Karting Complex.
Mm.
You're an instructor for Kelly Moss Racing.
Mm-hmm.
You are an entrepreneur with the Texas Supercar Academy.
Yep.
So, and when you're not trying to get in a car and go race somewhere,
Sure.
when do you have, and plus you have to stay fit to do these things. When do you have time to sleep and eat?
I sleep about 7 to 8 hours a night.
Seriously, that much?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, wow.
Take care of myself. That's part of the fitness aspect of it. I do block my time pretty well. That's something that I learned when I was in high school.
Schedule discipline.
Not necessarily scheduled discipline, but being able to juggle multiple tasks at once. I don't think
Okay.
anyone's really good. There's you can't multitask. You can't
No.
be focused on two things at once, but you can task switch, right?
Yes.
So you can be doing one thing. Okay, now I'm going to do this thing, and I'm going to jump back to that thing. And so that's something that I got decently good at. Catch up on sleep on airplanes most of the time.
Well, I marveled, like one of the things I explained to people when you were racing with my car, for example, one of the bragging points I had about you was this kid's a full-time college student in mechanical engineering, maintaining grades.
Yeah.
And then during the racing season, you weren't just racing.
Yeah.
You were typically serving an internship somewhere
Sure. Yeah.
while racing the car.
Yeah.
And internships take more time than school.
Yeah.
While
It depends.
while staying fit and being productive in the car.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's, for those of you who've never had a schedule like that, let me tell you,
And I always feel like I can be doing more. Yeah, that's
more productive.
Yeah, yeah, or more efficient or more effective. Get things done more efficiently. And so, I think it's something that I always felt when I was in high school. This is what I learned: is you never don't have time for something. You just don't want to make the time for something.
Exactly.
So it's just not enough of a priority to make the time. And even myself, I fall into the trap where I'm like, I spent an hour watching YouTube videos like 2 days ago, right? And it's like, okay, well, I probably could have done something else. I'd gotten everything done I needed to,
could have been recoding my website. I could have been working on taxes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Whatever. Fill in the blank with whatever I could have been doing. I could have been, stretching because my legs are getting sore now, and I probably need to stretch. Well, that type of stuff. And so, it's just, I think you've got I'm really good at focusing for about an hour. I can focus on something very intensely for about an hour, and then I got to switch to something else. I got to take like a 10-minute break and then switch to something else. That's kind of how I do my, I can do this, this, and this. But it's nice with motorsports. You don't have like a day-to-day thing, right? And necessarily, right? You're not beholden to, I've got to be in the office for X amount of time, which can be very freeing. But it also can be very, when you have so much free time, I'm sure if you've experienced what can happen.
Oh, yeah. Well, where I can relate to you is that schedule when I was in college.
Yeah.
So I was a full-time college student. I was fighting on the U.S. national taekwondo team, and that was 3 workouts a day.
Yeah.
Plus I taught my classes.
Yeah.
For my taekwondo classes. Had a dog.
I can't. That's the one thing I haven't added in. I'd love to.
Had a dog and a girlfriend.
Yeah.
And maintained an eating schedule and a rest schedule and a training schedule, along with a full-time college schedule.
Yep.
And when it was all quote unquote over, it was like, whoa, I have this massive block of time in the day.
Yeah.
I have to do something.
Sure.
And so it wasn't a question of whether or not I could do something. It was simply a function of, I got to choose something.
Yeah.
I have to choose a direction.
Right.
And
exactly.
I didn't have a motorsports opportunity or anything related to it at the time. I was putting around on motorcycles. But, I'm going to further my education to pursue a different type of career than originally anticipated.
Yeah.
And then, boom, once I got that focus, time filled up all over again, and this is the new direction I'm going.
Sure.
But I don't understand doing anything less than that level of intensity.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And that's the thing that motorsports is very nice, right? Because it's very intense. It pushes you.
Yeah. But you're also responsible there's no structure to push for the next deal.
Yeah.
You got to push for the next deal.
Right.
And there's no set rules, policies, procedures. There's no textbook on that.
Sure. It's a very choose your own path ordeal.
Yeah. And so how many times a day do you think you make initiating phone calls and text messages and emails?
Yeah, I've gotten more disciplined about, today I'm going to make like these 4 or 5 phone calls, or I'm going to send these few text messages, or I'm going to touch in with, the teams that I've been working with. I'm going to, so I've gotten better at that. I'd say probably 3 days a week or so I'm reaching out for new opportunities. And then the other, while simultaneously those 3 days, like working on, a new presentation or a new, some content for social media or whatever it is, or organizing my next event, those.
Because I follow you on social media, and you have a really steady release of material and content.
Yeah, yeah.
So your discipline in social media shows. Because some people come out and they blast 20 things across their story.
Yeah.
And then there's nothing for a week.
Sure.
There's 3 or 4 or 5 things daily. And I would think with anything, maintaining the pace is more important than just uploading or dumping.
Yeah, and just like this is how I apply work to apply everything across life. It's just like you want it to be consistent and you want it to be good. You don't want to just bombard people with trash.
Right.
And I value my time. I value everyone else's time. So I'm trying to put useful content out, and it's helpful. And so that's part of the process, and I think social media rewards you for that, and that's another whole another whole podcast, right?
Podcasts,
yes, series, like another not one podcast, like a whole podcast
dedicated to it. Yes, exactly.
Which I'm not even qualified to speak on for sure, because I'm still learning all that.
Well, and as soon as you learn it, it's obsolete because it's changed again.
Because it's changed, right?
But gosh, I'm seeing how fast the time's going here, and I'm like, well, there's.
I think we'd be remiss if we didn't speak to the exact, kind of the process that someone can take now to get into the sport, to make their step in. So I don't know if you want to start kind of.
Well, like I said, we talked about this pre-show.
Yeah.
So the traditional method of motorsports has always been go-karts or a low horsepower spec racing series.
Sure.
But in today's modern era, technology has allowed a new form of motorsport entry.
Yes, definitely. And so we're talking about this in terms of like, okay, I get a lot of drivers, a lot of aspiring drivers like, okay, I want to go racing, where should I start? And a lot of it, as we've touched very heavily on in this podcast, it comes down to budget, right? So if you got unlimited funds, karting is a great way to start, right? Because the track time, even though it's relatively expensive in the long term, track time's inexpensive, the karts are inexpensive, it's going to be the best place to learn skill. It's just about the time investment. Then from there, sim racing has become quite a huge opportunity for people that are tech savvy or not even tech savvy. It's not too complicated to get into the sport and actually, start competing and get yourself opportunities, because to go sim racing is very easy. There's always people that are racing. You get to race all different kinds of vehicles, and you can start out with, a base wheel and pedal setup for $400, which, anyone with a little bit of extra work ethic, you can flip stuff on Facebook Marketplace. You can, work a couple extra hours, you can save whatever it is and get to that level. And then you can, scale up to a $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 sim that gets you more professional. And then from that aspect, you can start transferring those over to, the racing, the real life racing. And that's where I work with a lot of clients on like transferring their knowledge from sim racing into real life racing, because ultimately that's, for sim racing, most people that I deal with at least want to go racing in real life, but can't necessarily either invest the time.
Everybody wants to go racing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Everybody wants to be a professional race car driver.
True.
Everybody wants to be a rock star.
Astronaut.
And everybody wants to be an astronaut.
Yeah.
These are the three things you can count on, all men.
Yeah.
One of my favorite comedians, Jerry Seinfeld, made a comment about this.
Yeah.
As men, and people see men that read comic books and like, oh, superhero, lifesaver, whatever, Batman, Superman, whatever. People see that as a fantasy, but as young boys, these are career options.
Yeah.
In our mind.
Sure.
Now, of course, as we grow up and come to accept there's no such thing as superheroes, what's the next best thing? Professional rocket ship. Professional astronaut, race car driver, or athlete.
Yeah, totally.
These are the superhero options for the adult man.
Oh, yeah.
And so to do any one of those things is
Yeah.
living the dream.
Sure.
So you're the closest thing to a superhero that a man can choose to do in his adult life. And as you've expressed so well in this podcast today, it is by no means a simple task.
No. But luckily, with the advancements, with social media, with technology, you have more opportunities to get yourself to be a professional in the industry without actually having to like have the investment up front. And so that's something that is, and that's across all boards, right? You see people playing video games and are able to make a living as a professional gamer, right?
Yes.
And so it's the same, you can apply that same aspect into driving. And so then there's also drivers that leverage their sim sponsorships and sim racing deals into driving in real cars in real life. And
Yes.
so,
well, the biggest complaint has always been the talented drivers who, for lack of a budget or sponsorship, didn't get the opportunity they so richly deserved through their hard work and talent.
sure.
Showing their skill. And, the graveyard of racing careers is filled with immensely talented drivers who couldn't get a break,
Yeah.
that had more talent than you shake a stick at.
Yeah, totally.
And I think the technology, to some degree, removes that budget consideration for a chance to display skills.
It gives more of an opportunity, certainly. The challenge with the sim racing is going, if you've not raced in a car, going from the car or from the sim racing to a car.
That's a huge transition.
Yeah, because it's very different. And the same thing going from the car to the sim racing. It is possible to make those transitions, but it takes, dedication, time, effort, just like any other sport.
And I got to admit, it took me a while to appreciate the fine touch it took to turn a fast lap in a GT3 car on the sim.
Yeah, totally.
But boy, once I was in a GT3 car,
Yeah, completely different, huh?
I still dream about that moment. That day, I still have like almost. It's almost like what do you call it? What veterans suffer from?
Oh, like PTSD.
I have PTSD from that day. I mean,
Jeez.
that was the first and only time
Yeah.
where I went fast enough in a car to suffer a physical consequence of the speed.
Yep.
I didn't think it was possible.
Yeah.
I've been driving and I've been doing race cars, endurance racing.
Yep.
Of course, at a much lower end of race car.
Sure.
But I never got tired from driving endurance. I got parts of my body that burned from a bad seat or a weird position.
Yeah.
But my ability to go fast and stay fast for long periods of time, whether on a motorcycle or in a car, there was never a physical consequence. It was never difficult for me to physically do.
Yep.
And I'm in this GT3 race car. And I mean, my fingers stopped working when I told them to because the fire that started up in my neck through my shoulders carried down into my fingertips and they stopped responding. And then I realized my tongue was dry and I was having trouble breathing all of a sudden. Well, and I'm in a $500,000 race car. If I can't make it shift exactly when I need to make it shift as fast as I'm going, you don't want to be the guy who goes off his first day in a GT car.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
It's time to bring it in.
Time to pit.
And when I pitted, and having watched you do so many times in racing, come up to the pit, pop off your gear, open the door, and you would just hop right out of the car after being in the car for a long time.
Yeah.
I found that I could not physically get myself out of the seat.
It's tight, you know.
My hands weren't working. My legs couldn't get under me; they were jello, and I was a jello puddle in this car seat. And they said, "Do you want us to pull us out?" And my ego would not let anybody pull me out of my own car. I said, "Give me a minute. Just go on. I'll come back and get me."
Yeah.
And 15 minutes later, they came to get me. Like, I still can't get out of the car. If this thing was on fire, I would have died right there.
Oh no.
And I would have chosen to die because I was not going to let anybody pull me out of my car.
There's an extinguisher button. We're good. We got it handled.
But in that moment, it was just crushing to me to suffer that physical consequence. And as a result, I'm in my head going, it just pops out of this thing. Like, after an hour, I couldn't do 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, it's takes the physical. It takes a toll, and a lot of it's the mental. That's where a lot of, because there's so much information coming in.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot of information coming in, and there's a lot of things that you have to do. Remember to shift, remember to downshift, remember to turn at the right spot, brake at the right spot. Oh, and there's all this information. And there's other cars you're passing, or whatever it is. So.
And the car made noises I never heard before.
Yeah.
The first time the air compressor recharged itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought, is that an alarm? Did I break something? What is that? I'm not even going fast yet. Why is it making a noise?
Yeah. Oh man, that's funny.
And in that second session, when I was going fast enough to really exert myself, it was coming on at the exact same spot in the same turn through the third gear. I'm like, is it the third gear that's causing that problem? Is it the hill that's causing the problem? Is it the turn on the hill that's causing the problem? Am I doing something wrong that's causing a problem? And I keep looking for a light on the dash.
Yeah.
And there's not a light coming on, but there's focus. These guys are going really fast. You got to go.
Yeah.
So that was a hilarious moment. But as a result, and it was such an expensive thing to do that one time, handed the bill like, oof. Don't let my wife see that, because that would have paid for a really nice vacation for a whole week.
Oh, man.
And this was a day in my own car that I owned.
Yeah.
But having done it, I come away now and go, okay, I know my place in the world now. I know what I'm not going to be doing with the rest of my life. And my respect for what you have accomplished and what people like you are out there doing. Knowing there are other classes of racing that are so much faster than that.
Yeah.
What is that physical toll going on in there?
Feels like a go-kart.
Another level, brother.
Oh, yeah.
Another level.
Oh, yeah.
But so in that, let's talk about a dozen other things that Alec Udell is doing right now.
Sure.
I think
Totally.
I'm thinking, of course, as a business owner myself,
Yeah.
you got to talk about that new business.
Yeah. So I've got a couple that are driver academy focused. Obviously on social media, you can find me on Instagram at Udell Alec. Same thing on TikTok, which is actually starting to get more and more interesting, and that's cool. But with the businesses that I've started, I have a driving academy that we've mentioned, Texas Supercar Academy, and that's just for the the guy or gal that has this car, the sports car, supercar that they've always wanted to take on the track or just had a desire to go on track, never really experienced it, and want to get professional coaching. Maybe the track day environment's a bit too, there's too many things going on, don't really understand like what they need to be doing. So we have a more of a curated type of track day environment with more one-on-one type coaching, lead follow. We put someone out there in front of you so you know where to go on track, really bring you up to speed nice and smoothly. And so we have small groups down at MSR Houston, and that's about one time a quarter, so 4 times a year or so. That's been awesome. We're starting to really grow that group and get a good group of consistent people that we're getting out there and really just focusing on, what are the fundamentals of driving that make you go fast? Like I talked about, of course, it's that understanding of where the limit of grip is, but then also there's all, a whole slew of things that go into driving a sports car fast and safely around a track. And that's our important thing. The other one that I've been working on with Kelly Moss Road and Race, and this is a lot more what the social media is focused on, is we have a digital driving academy.
Oh,
Yeah.
When did that happen?
So we started that last August. Yeah, so that's been a few months now in the making. Basically, what we do is 3 times a month we've got a live, seminar style training where I'm talking about a specific topic that deals with being a race car driver. So like this month's topic, it's February right now as we're recording this, is grip and traction. So I had on Tuesday nights are usually our calls. We talk, I create a presentation, talk through like all different kinds of things of, traction. Last month was braking. I think next month's mindset in terms of fitness, as we were just speaking about, and how important it is when you get in the car. So that's an awesome, and that one's available to anyone. If it's super a super approachable platform, and it helps. It works from people just looking to get into the sport, or you're more advanced, have some time, and it's really been beneficial for. We've got I think 55 members in it now, and now working really to scale it as we've had our small first group.
So let's go over that real quick.
Sure.
How do people find out where to go? How do they find you online for your academy?
Yeah, the TexasSupercarAcademy.com, very easy. And then you can go to kellymoss.com and click on the Driver Academy tab, and that'll get you to our Driver Academy website.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Alec, as you can see, we could do this literally all day.
Oh yeah, and we'll do it again, I'm sure.
Oh, well, you've left so many little tidbits to just unpack and have days with, and I
I'm
can't.
thinking too.
Yeah. Oh. And you'll leave more trails each time you come.
Sure,
there'll be no end of discussion with that. And
always loose ends.
Always. But I really want to focus on what you're working so hard at.
I appreciate that, Frank.
Well, I'm support. I come to the Texas Supercar Academy.
Yeah.
I send people there.
Yes. Yeah.
And also with my own little shop, Euro World Motorsports, I want to make sure people's cars are properly aligned for that track day.
Yep, properly aligned.
So the car behaves as intended.
Exactly.
Under Alec's instruction down there.
Yeah.
But I would like to end today with you and your stuff. So
sure.
Alec Udell,
Yep.
Texas Supercar Academy.
Yeah.
And what's the date on that next one?
The next one we have is March 24th.
March 24th.
And then end of May. We haven't settled on the date just yet, working with the track.
And then if they want to experience more of your instructional work online,
sure.
Kelly Moss.
kellymoss.com, and then the Driver Academy tab.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Alec, thank you so much for coming in today.
Always a pleasure, Frank. Love speaking with you.
Oh, he tolerates me.
No.
But I want to thank all you guys for taking the time to watch us here today at the Talking Gearheads. It will be thetalkinggearheads.com. We'll have a Facebook, Instagram. I guess we're going to have to do a TikTok thing now.
You don't have to. It's just, it's fun too.
Well, the challenge is keeping up with all
the platforms.
Oh,
I know.
There's a new one every day.
I totally get that.
And, this is where I'm like, I'm going to have to hire a kid just to handle all the platforms to make sure the media gets out there. Because
I'm thinking about the same thing right now too, believe me.
Yeah. Because
it's tough.
and I'm trying not to think about the cars I have apart on a lift
Yeah.
that need my attention, and I'll be working late tonight
Sure.
getting those back together. But no, again, thank you.
Always a pleasure, Frank. Thank you.
My pleasure, brother. Thank you, guys. See you next time.